So the methodology we're about to walk through is inspired by methodologies that have come before it, and I'd like to walk you through a couple of those. One of them is the ideation methodology from the design thinking organization, IDEO. Their method works in three parts: inspiration, ideation, and implementation. And they introduce a concept that I would like to share with you that I think is helpful and has informed the neighborhood revitalization methodology that we'll talk about in a second, which is that you are diverging your scope of understanding and converging throughout this process. So for example, in their methodology, as you're seeking to be inspired, you sort of have a divergent point of view on things. You're looking in places far and wide. You're not putting your problem-solving hat on. You're really out there just looking and listening and learning. But after you finish that inspiration phase, you then converge around a couple of ideas that you want to test and develop proof of concepts for. But once you converge on a few ideas, you then diverge back out in order to test those things in an array of scenarios to see what would be most effective in addressing the challenges and building on the strengths of the problem you've identified. And then finally, you converge on ideas that allow you to implement the ideas. So I really like this idea of moving forward from a sort of inspirational point of view towards the implementation, but diverging and converging along the way as you learn more and move towards implementation. Another inspired methodology is the double diamond approach that was developed by the Design Council UK. It also has this concept of beginning with a divergent point of view and diverging again and converging throughout the process. And what I think is unique about this one is the development of the problem statement itself is a part of the process. So rather than start with a definition of what the problem is, the methodology includes sort of a phase one where you go out and discover what the problem is. So in other words, you're not starting with a problem in mind. You're just looking at it as an open-ended way at the particular problem and converging on a problem statement from which you then divergently explore in order to once again converge on the solution. So the idea of getting out into a neighborhood and a district and learning as much as you can to discover what the strengths and weaknesses are and come up with a problem statement is an interesting way to start rather than starting your approach with a problem in mind. So another methodology that's inspired this work is the innovation team methodology developed by Bloomberg Philanthropies. When I worked on Mayor Eric Garcetti's innovation team, we followed this methodology and I found it to be very, very helpful. And it's inspired my thinking around how we can incorporate some of those best practices into an urban planning methodology for neighborhood revitalization. So it's similar to the previous two methodologies we talked about, although this one has a focus on public sector management consulting. But the steps are similar. Step one, investigate the problem. Step two, generate new ideas. Step three, prepare to deliver, which means identifying stakeholders, identifying funding sources, preparing a scope of work for the actual work that's going to be implemented. And then the fourth step is to implement it and adapt, refine. And I think that fourth step is really important because when we think about urban planning, sometimes we think of the preparation of the plan as the end of our process, but really it's the beginning of the process because it's the beginning of the change we seek to make. And we need to be mindful about how those changes will play out and refine and adapt them over time. So that fourth piece of this method has inspired what you'll hear in the next chapter on our methodology. And the last one, I had a chance to talk with this designer about his diagram called the design squiggle, which is kind of a playful methodology where you kind of start out with a lot of uncertainty and noise as you explore the problem and explore, in our case, the neighborhood. And it's okay to be noisy. It's okay that things don't make sense. It's okay that you're uncertain about things. Because as you move forward and you conduct the research and you do the data drive and you do your stakeholder interviews and you walk the district, things will start to make a little more sense. And as you develop specific ideas and test them, there's still a little bit of dissonance. But ultimately, if you do your work and do a rigorous analysis, you can get into some specific ideas that make a lot of sense. So I like his playful method of thinking about the beginning of a process as really messy and being okay with that messiness as you sort of converge into something that makes sense and can be implemented. Let's talk about the 7-step methodology. We're going to get into each one specifically, but I'm just going to recap it now that you've had a chance to hear some of the inspired methodologies. First step is discovery. We go out and we listen and observe. We're not problem solving. We're not even identifying what's working and what's not. We're just out there absorbing. The second step is to document the current state. That's when we do a rigorous deep dive into quantitative and qualitative data, and I'll walk you through some specifics on that. Third step is based on the deep dive of data that you've done and the discovery to assess the strengths and weaknesses of that particular district. The fourth step then is to research and identify potential strategies that would work based specifically on the strengths and weaknesses identified. The fifth step then is to establish a revenue source to pay for the improvements that you've determined. And then the sixth step is to select and implement those strategies and programs. And then the seventh step is stewardship, which is ongoing maintenance, operations, and refinement. So let's jump into the first phase, discovery.